So guys, here we are. I'm in a little bistro and I'm having a mocha. We're going to talk about the sugar content in hot drinks that are readily available, always on menus. So as you can see, we have some variety here of some of the examples that you can get out and about. But yeah, I do think that a lot of us are completely in the dark when it comes to the content of sugar in some of these. So I'm just going to expand your minds a little so that we can look after ourselves a little bit better and have some informed choice. So we all love our coffees and our flavoured lattes, our hot drinks. I've got to say I am a real victim of the chai latte experience, but it's eye-opening when you really look into the nutritional aspects of these drinks. So nutritional value you want to look at, especially in things that you're out and about, you're buying maybe on a daily basis and they don't come with labels. It's up to us to kind of look into that, and it can be daunting. It's not something that's prompted really, we just have the trust in whatever is being served to us, that we're not going to have some shocking content of sugar or salt in some of these things that we're buying out and about. So I just wanted to give you an example of some of the main high street common drinks that we go for. I've got my mocha here at the moment with some oat milk. I will be looking up the content of sugar in that later on. But yeah, just to give you an example, we have hot chocolate, Starbucks. The caramel hot chocolate, for instance, has 23 teaspoons of sugar. You've also got a drink which is a hot mulled fruit drink and it has some cinnamon in it. Many people would think that's a healthier choice, so they would go for that option, and that has 99 grams of sugar. That is probably the highest that I have come across in a long time. So yeah, going against the recommended intake, you're already exceeding that enormously, but also the recommended daily intake of sugar for a child maximum is 25 grams. So to give you an example of where you could easily go over this in one sitting is to have a hot chocolate with your family. So a hot chocolate, for instance, in Starbucks, Costa, some of these hold up to 40 grams of sugar. So definitely already you're going over that. If you have a chai latte, some of them have been as low, I say low, but 35 grams of sugar in a chai latte. And the highest one being Costa's chai latte, it has 80 grams, almost 80 grams of sugar. And if you are treating your child to one of these drinks, they've already exceeded that in one day. And many of us have extended or separated families now, so children can be going to different households and having what the adults would call a treat. But to put that into perspective, if that kid is getting sugar in most meals, or they're going on to granny's house and they're getting a treat, and then they're going to their dad's house and they're getting a treat, and they're going back home and they're getting a treat, that treat is no longer a treat, it's consistent sugar bombs basically. And we really need to look at potentially that child developing diabetes at a young age. It's not something that is rare, it's become really prevalent in our society, and we have to look at the ways in which we can avoid this. It's not leading a boring life, it's just really getting yourself more informed so that you can make decisions based on your child's future instead of the joy of now. And it really helps them to be at less risk of obesity, which again is happening really commonly now in school children's age groups. It's really commonly happening now that there's many children that are not only overweight, but they're going into the obese category at a young age, and they're not even at young adult age. So it's up to our home environments and the influences around them and the habits which we form as a household and the way which we demonstrate we look after our own health. It's much harder to undo all of these habits and undo the implications to our health once they've reached a certain point. So the unraveling and the undoing of that is going to be a lot harder than making some changes now that can really contribute to us and our families having a better chance of good health, that can cause a ripple effect on their entire lives and their confidence, their body image and their self-esteem. You're looking at 131 hot flavoured drinks across the board in our high street chains that should carry the food, um, the FDA label of red warning. However, a lot of that isn't really policed, and we put our trust in these choices that we cannot see the label. We can only see a menu, we can only see a board in front of us. And as you can see, even seemingly making a healthier choice, I used to go for chai latte because I thought it was better than having caffeine and having a coffee. I did not realise the amount of sugar that was also popped in that. Making it from home is a whole different experience and you can control the levels, but when you're buying from high street chains, you're maybe not recognising the amount of sugar that you are ingesting, and you're not able to then balance that out for the rest of the day, and you're potentially looking at having up to 200 grams of sugar in one day if you've only had your recommended amount in one sitting and one drink in that one day, and adding that up through the course of a week can become humongous. That of course will integrate into our weight management, our energy levels, our gut health, our risk of diabetes, our risk of heart disease. The list goes on. So really looking at content of sugar, fat, carbohydrates, salt, as well as the calories is crucial in being well informed and making healthy choices towards your health and your well-being. So just to put things into perspective for you and give you something to weigh this up against, 30 grams of sugar is the equivalent of 2 tablespoons of sugar. And I ain't talking about the tablespoons that we keep in our utensil drawer in the kitchen. So 30 grams being the equivalent of 2 tablespoons, you can only imagine then when you're going on to look at our high street drinks, how much can be in just one cup. When we're looking at our recommended adult daily intake of sugar as well, our reference guide for that is 90 grams, and 90 grams is actually equating to the total amount of sugars which we have in one day. So that's including anything that comes in a natural form. You have natural sugars which occur in fruit, for instance, and some starchy food types also turn into glucose. The body uses that and turns that into glucose. So it's the accumulation of the natural sugars and those starchy kind of foods that turn into sugar in our body, combined with the added sugars that we're having. Added sugars being like free form, such as adding spoonfuls into your cups of tea or coffee, but also it is added in great quantities, normally in, confectionery, sweets, chocolate bars, biscuits, cakes. But you're also looking at the sugar content in processed foods, because we're not making that in our own home. Then we're not aware, or we might feel that we're aware, but we can't envisage what that looks like. So this is going to help you to envisage what that looks like in one drink. So looking at your flavoured coffees, obviously it's up to 45 grams, so you're definitely over 2 tablespoons already, looking at 3, almost 4 tablespoons in a cup of flavoured coffee. Hot chocolate obviously is quite huge as well, up to 55 grams. So if you're having a hot chocolate, you're already looking at 5 tablespoons or more being in your hot chocolate. It's not to say that you shouldn't have that, but it's just having that awareness that empowers us, because if we've got the awareness of what we're ingesting, it might not be too great for our bodies at that particular moment, but then the choices that we make for the rest of the day can be more loving, more nourishing for our body. You can see why you would maybe have no awareness whatsoever of the total quantity that you're having in your everyday life. Just to compare as well, Coca-Cola, we all know that many people started re-evaluating their soft drink choices, and in the last decade I know that they've got bad press a lot of the fizzy drinks. So Coca-Cola, a lot of people have changed over to things like Diet Coke, but we will be chatting about the kind of controversial debate with sweeteners as well, and how sweeteners aren't necessarily a healthy choice for you as well. They make it more convenient for us, of course, to still have the things that we love and make us feel, almost trick the body into thinking we're still having that sugar. But I'm going to chat about how they have their downfalls as well. And as you can see at the bottom of this list, we've got chocolate milk, which is about 30 grams of sugar. So you're looking at 2 tablespoons of sugar being in some chocolate milk, which many of us give to ourselves or our children. And we think this is a healthier choice. It's got some calcium, of course. It has that nutritional aspect to it. But it's also got sugar, which a lot of us aren't aware of. And a lot of milk has sugar added to it as well. So it's quite important if you do want to reduce your sugar intake and you do drink a lot of milk or milk-based products. So according to verywellfit.com, sugar is used widely as a flavour enhancer, but it can also be used to create better food texture, add bulk, improve the shelf life of packaged foods, and it also makes products moist. And it's also used for fermentation, so you can see that it's widely beneficial in the food industry, and quite often this is done freely. We've normalised it, and because we've normalised it, we are not maybe thinking twice when we go to choose a processed food, something that's packaged, or we're freely adding this at home. And also for fermentation purposes as well. Obviously, some of the fermented foods are more appealing because they're more beneficial to our health. They have live good bacteria for our gut, but they're also obviously created using sugar processes. It's added to a lot of savoury foods as well, such as tomato ketchups, soups, salad dressings and sauces. So because of this, and because it's so normally readily used, I'm going to help you to enhance your knowledge and expand your empowerment, I guess, so that you can be a bit more witty when it comes to choosing things in your everyday life. So if you've ever wondered what the differences were in the types of sugar that we have on offer, then let me run this past you. So we're looking at the most commonly used sugar first of all, white granulated sugar. White sugar can be seen as the most processed form of the sugars on offer, but white and brown sugar contain similar calories. But I guess in looking at the process of this, brown sugar contains more calcium than white sugar, but this is only in trace amounts, and some of the other minerals like iron are slightly higher in brown sugar as well because it hasn't undergone the same production process. It has been processed, but not to the same extent as white sugar, which has stripped that of all of the remaining nutrients. And we can determine the colour of the sugar based on the production process. So it's using sugar crystals from the sugar beets and the sugar canes, various colours and little nutritional value but calorific value. And when we look at some of the alternatives to sugar, a lot of people are leaning towards some sweeteners, and they use these in foods, drinks and recipes which are processed, but also people are freely adding them to their diet and using things like stevia and other commonly known sweeteners on their high street shelves. But here's some facts for you. When you're looking at sweetened products, you are consistently adding fructose in high amounts. So many people that are using sweeteners, we are looking really at fructose in its processed form, and it's used as an additive in sweetened foods. And it has become a bit of a fad, to be honest. People wanting to avoid the calorific content of sugar, the sort of disadvantages of having sugar, and the risks of a spike in your blood sugar levels. But there are studies which shows that when you compare fructose with glucose naturally occurring obviously, research is consistently linking refined sugars and added fructose, which you find in sweeteners and sweetened products, to a higher risk of health conditions like diabetes and heart disease. Also, it's worth a mention that when these sweetened alternatives were first discovered in a lab environment, They were actually looking for something to medicate people with stomach ulcers. In that search, they actually found a sweetened product, something that tasted of sugar but had 0 calories. And of course, upon finding this revelation, they were on to gold straight away. In many of the laboratory trials that they do on rats and mice, the very thing that's used to increase weight, these chemicals, which are within sweetened products, within sweeteners that we use, we find they've got no calorific value, but the effect that they're having on laboratory rats and laboratory mice is that this is what tends to be used in order to fatten them up for experiments. So it's worth noting that, and it's worth noting that maybe at a more chemical level within the body, we are kind of behind, and in time we're going to really discover the effects which this has within the bodily systems. It's worth noting as well that many of the people who are writing and advocating better health and wellness, those that are professionals and come from backgrounds that can be trustworthy, they're also revealing how harmful these can be when it comes to those with ADHD or on spectrum or developing brains as well, or those who are struggling with brain function, those who are struggling with mental health. They definitely are asking people to be very aware and avoid sweeteners, especially stevia, and it's something that Dr. Daniel Amen talks about in his book. Basically, he's written a book on psychiatry and the things that he has found throughout his career, and he heavily emphasises the need for your body to have foods that love it back, not just foods that you love. And he heavily emphasises some of the findings when he worked with children who were showing perhaps signs of autism and changing their diets and what certain foods were enhancing their ability to develop more speech, for instance, and those which were limiting, or those that really affected mood and hyperactivity. And sugars, along with the sweeteners, are something that he covers as something that you should really be looking at by making small diet changes. But I guess if you're wanting to weigh it up and you're wanting to make a choice between going for something with the sugar and going for something with the sweetener, now that you've got this information, you can make a better choice. Many would say that going for the sweetener is better because it's less calories. And if that is your target, to avoid calories in your day, then that might be beneficial. But it's also realising that if you're heavily leaning on chemicals, then adding chemicals to your body regularly throughout the day is also going to have a detrimental effect on how your body functions and how your body sheds weight. So if you're looking for some tips on alternatives to sugar, you may want to consider other types of drinks when you're out and about. So some of the ones that I find beneficial when you want to make a healthier choice is some of the teas that you can find available. Herbal teas, some green teas, some fruit teas, and obviously these would be unsweetened as well. Looking at things like your flavoured waters and fruit juices, which are always good. Fruit is nothing to be avoided or feared, because there is much benefit in eating fruit and having fruit juices, especially if they are made from pure juice and they have the pulp and the fibre retained in them. But you also want to look at some of the diet drinks instead of obviously the full fat versions, but these should be taken with caution, and that's all relating to the content that I spoke of before with sweeteners and weighing everything up basically. And some of the best ways to substitute for sugar are looking at more natural alternatives such as agave nectar and honey. These are syrups. Obviously they do have high sugar content, but it is natural, it's naturally occurring sugars. And when you look at fruit itself as well, that can be a great alternative when you feel like you need something sweet. Some of the sweeter fruits are those such as watermelon and mangoes, and they have a relatively high sugar content, but generally fruit tends to contain less sugar than added sugar foods. And if you're going to make a choice to have sugar remain in your life, because we can't really escape it, but if you're wanting to make that choice, it's much better to lean on your fruit sugars and your natural sugars than it is to have your added sugars. So it's something that you may want to Look at in your life and see which would be best to reduce or eliminate, and something to concentrate on rather than the sugary diet which you're perhaps leaning on already. And if you find that you lean on sugar when you're stressed, when you're feeling anxious, or when you're depressed, I'm also going to supply a document which gives you some of the ways in which you can replace that dopamine need. Instead of leaning on sugar, you're finding that in other forms. It's looking at your food cravings basically, and learning how to replace them with healthier options. And that will be at the end of this video. Here are some more daily recommended intakes that you might want to be wise to, especially when it comes to weight loss or weight management. We're looking at salt. So the recommended daily intake maximum amount for an adult would be 6 grams of salt. And this is something that many people are deceived by. They think that they don't have high salt content in their day, and then when they look into some of the labels and they start to keep food diaries, they realise that they're perhaps going over the salt recommended limit every day. And this obviously adds to the risk of stroke and heart disease. Looking at one aspect, for instance, you might not realise how much salt there can be in some of the processed things that you're using every single day in your life. Take, for instance, this bottle of soy sauce. You can see that when you look at the label, it's giving you the nutritional value per 100 ml. Go right down to the bottom and you can see that the salt is 14.1 grams in 100 ml of this soy sauce. Now you might argue and say you're not going to use 100 millilitres, you're only going to use 50, but you're already looking at, you've taken your entire salt content for the day in just that little amount of soy sauce. And many of us, when we're buying takeaways, we don't realise the amount of soy sauce that's being used by the chef in that particular meal. Or if you're cooking a stir fry, for instance, you're just freely adding it from the bottle, and you might actually be using 100 ml or even more, depending on the dish. And the next one that I'm going to use as an example is available on our high street shelves. It's a curry sauce, and as you can see, the nutritional value again is being recorded as the content that's found in 100 grams of that powder that forms a sauce. So the salt content is only 1.7 grams, as you can see, per 100 grams, but many people use about 300 grams when they're making this into a meal. So again, you're having to look at that content at the bottom of the label, seeing that it's 1.7 grams. But when you're applying it to yourself and your measurement and your meal, you're looking at 5.1 grams. So you would then have to be careful with what you've had throughout the rest of your day. And it would be pretty impossible to not have had any more salt throughout that day. So it would definitely take you up to your maximum limit or over quite easily. And again, just showing you how easy it can be to be deceived by labels. You're looking at a typical salsa sauce that many people use when it comes to, having a treat, having some crisps. Looking at the salt content in this, it's saying 40 grams is what they're using as the serving, as a guide. So for 40 grams of the salsa, you've got 0.60 grams of salt. But most of us, let's be honest, are not just going to have 40 grams of that. Most people, when they open that salsa, they're going to have around half of that, if not the entire jar, depending on the way that they're feeling. So that entire jar is 300 grams. And if you look at the content, in 100 grams of this salsa, at the bottom you see it's 1.51 grams per 100 grams. So again, you're timesing that by 3, and you're already on your way over half of the amount of recommended salt for the day. And just to give you another thing to think of when you're looking at the entire perspective here, many people want to give their children much healthier choices, so replacements. So quite often you're looking at things like smoothies being commonly kept in a fridge, and of course these are made of fruit sources and the sugar is found in natural form from fruit juices. But you're also looking at potentially not realising the content of sugar in these. If you look at the one that I have here used as an example, that again has been recorded for the values within 100 ml of that smoothie. But as you can see, the carton is 180 ml. So again, it's something you want to take into account when you're reading labels. So if you look at carbohydrates, 11.2 grams, but 10.7 of these are actually sugars. So 10.7 grams of sugar are found in 100 ml of this smoothie. But because it's 180 ml within the pack, you're almost doubling that. So you're almost reaching 20 grams of sugar in that smoothie alone. If that child is having a healthier option, fruit, and all the nutrients that's found within a smoothie, that's great. But if you can imagine, if the rest of the day, perhaps they go to Granny's, they have biscuits, they have a processed meal, they have something from a shop in a packet, quite easily the sugar intake could go quite high or through the roof. Maybe eliminating these add-ons. Now you would think that would sound pretty mad. Surely you're doing enough by just introducing fruit into your diet more. But actually there have been some that have shockingly ended up with diabetes type 2 because they've not realised making that choice, that added option onto their day. I'm going to increase my fruit intake. I want to have as much fruit and vitamins in my body as I can, but they're not altering their other habits. They're in fact increasing their amount of sugars. So you really have to balance it out. If you're adding more fruits and you're adding more natural sugars, then you want to take away some of the unhealthy, really gut destroying sugars that we've maybe been leaning on as well. So looking at your fat, and your daily intake of that is looking at around 70 grams of that is your maximum that's recommended per day. Fat can really be one of those areas that many people are not realising is laced in certain foods or food types and products as well. And for many, cheese is a culprit because most cheese lovers do love the taste and they tend to have it quite regularly. But just to give you an example here of a soft cheese that's readily available in our supermarkets, looking at the content of this cheese, you might not be aware of the amount of fat that's found, especially in soft cheeses. It is, of course, there within the harder cheddars, but soft cheese tends to be one of the main culprits. So if you look at the fat content, we're looking at that per 100 grams, and the fat content is 21 grams. So you're already almost over a quarter of the content in your day. And that 100 grams might be something that you even go over because you're a bit of a cheese fiend. So please keep this in mind as well. And other fat culprits tend to be your processed meats. So you're looking at bacon. You have about 13 grams of fat in 100 grams of bacon. And pork sausages, only 3 of these sausages contain 24 grams of fat. So you're looking at a third of your fat intake for the day is just in those 3 sausages alone. And of course, the fats that are found in these products, in the pork and the processed meat category, most of these are highly saturated fats, so it's not the healthy fats. You'll want to really look at unsaturated in better quantities rather than having high quantities of saturated fats that are found in some of these products and culprits that we're going to chat about. So the next thing would be butter. In 1 tablespoon of butter, you have 14 grams of fat. So if you're having butter with your breakfast, you're having butter within some baked goods, you're having butter within pastry, you're having butter within a main meal, you can imagine that you can easily go well over the 70 gram limit in one day if you're not really aware of butter not just being what you add to things, what you spread on your bread, but also quantity of butter that's found within the things that you're maybe buying out and about, your convenience foods, things that you are readily picking up. And cheese again, soft cheese has around 17 grams of fat per 100 grams, and it's all saturated fat. So it ain't really good for the old cholesterol or the weight management, or indeed for the risk of obesity, stroke. And I'm just going to put it out there because being vegan, I do try and have as much whole foods as possible, try and make it as less processed as possible. We do like to treat ourselves sometimes, and we do like to have some alternatives. So when we're looking at having alternatives such as cheese alternatives, we even have that problem. So someone who is vegan might not necessarily realise that they're having a huge amount of fat as well in some of these alternatives. So just looking at one of my favourites, the applewood cheddar, which is very smoky. I love the smoky cheese. Then you can see here from the website, it has 24.6 grams per block because it's sold in 100-gram blocks. So you have a huge content of fat in there as well, although it has been obviously derived from coconut oil. So it's come from a different form, that fat. And I have to probably say that most people who are plant-based, they don't have the same volume of fat coming in throughout every meal. So you do want to make sure that you are getting fats and they are healthier fats. So it isn't necessarily as harmful for someone who's plant-based to have had that volume of fat within their day. But obviously if they're heavily leaning on all of the alternatives, then they might find that that volume can add up pretty quickly. Creams as well are real culprits. So you've got about 23 grams of saturated fat and 100 grams of cream. And obviously the heavier creams, the double creams, have more substance as well to them. But you'll also find some of the single creams do contain fat that you might want to monitor as well. And fries, quite often we get these as a side order when it comes to convenience meals when we're out and about, but there's up to 17 grams of fat in just one side serving. And I'm just going to hit you with something that you might not necessarily have known about. There are websites now that have added a nutritional aspect to them. So some of the main giants when it comes to convenience foods and those that are having a real effect on our society are starting to realise that they need to show that they're allowing that person to have a freedom of choice, but also have the information which they may require to make healthier choices. So you might not know that McDonald's have got a nutritional calculator available within their website. Although it's not very easy to find within the menus, you will be able to find that if you type that into a search engine. So I wanted to give you an example of some of the things that you have when you stop at a fast food chain and you might not realise the quantity of calories, the quantity of fat, or the quantity of salt or sugars within their meals. And not even their meals, within their snacks alone. So the first individual item I thought I would look up would be the chicken selects, because they're very popular. Kids used to love getting chicken nuggets, and these chicken selects are rebranded and enticing, healthier option. But looking here at chicken selects, you can see that there's 20 grams of fat per serving, and this was just choosing 3 chicken selects. I thought I would go on to make it into a meal. So using some popular items, you've got the Coca-Cola, zero sugar if someone's thinking about their sugar intake, a side portion of fries and chicken selects. And I used the 3 pieces just to show you the nutritional value for what seems like a very small meal that probably won't feel so filling, and you might be hungrier in a short time after. So as you can see, the calories for this meal are almost touching 700, but you have 37 grams of fat in that serving. If you wanted to make it into something even more, I decided to add a Big Mac, a Coca-Cola and a fries. And the nutritional value for that ended up being 831 calories and 41 grams of fat. This is huge because we all know that it's so easy to just drop into McDonald's or another drive-through or even another place on the high street that you feel isn't too bad because you're hungry and you want to grab something quick. But do we really realise what we're putting into our body or into our children's bodies? And if we do, are we making those proactive choices the rest of the day to ensure that, you're allowed these things in life, but are you going to be clever about the rest of your day? Are you going to ensure that your body isn't going to get into detrimental conditions because of these everyday, unaware, uninformed choices that you could be making? Also, to throw in another culprit there, deep pan pizza and other types of pizza, they can be low in sugar, but they're also high in fat and salt content. So you might want to look at that when you're maybe considering having like Domino's pizza. They should have nutritional values as well recorded on their websites. But also if you're buying from the frozen department of your supermarket, you might want to look at the labels as well to ensure that you're getting the quantity of fat or salt that you really want rather than you're overlooking. Ice cream has a huge amount of fat as well, and in just one scoop it has up to 19 grams of fat. And if you're looking at biscuits, they might have a medium content of fat within them if they had to be categorised, but they're very high in sugar, and this could add obviously to the rest of the day and going over your sugar limitations. So if you're wanting to look at some of the alternatives and some other tips to help you make better choices, here's some of the ways which you can reduce some of these problems. Looking at trimming all of the fat from your meats and try to cook them differently. If a steak or bacon is cooked not in a frying environment, it's air fried or it's grilled and the fat is allowed to run off of the meat itself and not be ingested, then that can take away some of the fat content as well. Look at choosing lower fat cheeses over like your soft cheeses with your full fat content, and obviously hard cheese has a slightly less fat content as well to your softer cheeses. Looking at olive oil, because olive oil has many benefits, especially if it's used uncooked. When you use these healthier oils, they're always healthier in their normal room temperature version. So olive oil is great when it's poured over salads. It has practically zero saturated fats and it has healthier fats as well. Some of these are lost when you cook at high temperatures, but nevertheless, olive oil is quite a good choice if you are going to be frying and using an oil. You can also find other blended, healthier type oils on the supermarket. And I am just going to supply you a picture of the one that I use that is a blend of various oils, and it has a high content of omega-3 and less of those saturated fats. Cooking from home. So if you want to make your own fries, even better, because you know the portion sizes, you know what's been used to fry them, you know the salt content. It's a no-brainer really. And instead of having your ice creams and your normally enticing desserts that you have, you could replace that with something that's a little bit more healthy, such as yogurts, frozen fruit desserts, different dessert options. You could have like a fruit with a low-fat custard, and making sure that the fruits that you do have are more of the natural chopped variety rather than those that you find in the tin can, because those in the tin can normally have added syrups and sugars as well. You can have something as basic as cereal with blueberries and yogurt, granola, or you can have a soya-based dessert. I like to have these little ones that I find on the free from department in the supermarket. Although it does have obviously sugar content there, it might be a better replacement for something else that I would have gone for instead. So let's look as well at misleading labelling. It is a pet hate of mine. It requires you to use your brain, and as if we don't have enough choices, choice fatigue, different things that we have to do with our brains on a daily basis, they want to make it a bit more complicated for us to work out whether this item is actually what it says. We have to be more proactive in that, and instead of just trusting what a label says, it can be quite misleading, the wording. So when you're looking at something that says, for instance, 95% fat-free, what that actually means is 5% of the product is fat and 95% isn't. But that's only really relating to 100 grams of that product. So 100 grams of that product has 5 grams of fat. And if the total product, for instance, is 400 grams, then you're looking at 4 times the amount of 5 grams. So that product would have 20 grams of fat. I hope that made sense. It's just so that you can realise that not everything is as it seems, and especially when it's in a shortened, worded form. So it might mislead you because it shouldn't actually be considered a low content. Under 3 grams of fat would be considered a low content, but most of these that use the reduced fat or 95% fat-free are showing that they've found ways to make the fat reduced, but there's still a high content. And it's misleading because they present the information in a different way or a deceiving way where you actually have to calculate it yourself. And when you look at reduced sugar, what actually that means is that there's less sugar in the content of the product against the original making of the product. So when you're looking at reduced, it might be relating to the fact that it's given the illusion that it's a healthy option rather than mentioning the artificial content. It might also still contain a high or relatively high amount of sugar, but also have sweeteners, and sweeteners are usually connected to the same dental and health problems as sugar. So compared to the manufacturing before it was packed, it could mean that the sugar is reduced, but by the time it's made into portions, it's still a high content. The reduced sugar applies to the entire cauldron, so however much they have in that massive urn is what it's relating to, but it's not really relating to our portion size. So you might want to rethink your toppings and rethink your sauces as well. When you look at tomato sauce, it has a huge content of sugar. I say huge, it's not so huge if you're going to measure it by a small dollop of sauce, but let's face it, most people, especially kids, when they have ketchup, they have a lot of it. So you're looking at the portion size being a lot more than what it would say on the label. And when you look at the label, look at the amount of sauce that you might have compared to the serving, and look at the amount of sugar content in that as well. And that's your homework. Go away, have a look, find out the sugar content of tomato sauce. Also, you may want to look at things like mayo, because mayo has high fat content. Typically, cereals, they are major culprits when it comes to the content of sugar. And many of these can be quite low in nutritional value as well and be almost like empty calories. The main culprits are those that are obviously marketed to children. They're trying to make them look fun and colourful, but also you get some that are trying to lean towards that healthier labelling, and they're saying that they're good for fibre, fortified with certain vitamins and minerals. When you look at the labels, you'll see that those benefits are outweighed by the amount of sugar that you're finding within that item. Even some of the better known ones on our shelves that people lean towards if they think they want to be healthier, check the content of sugar. So you might want to do a bit of homework and look into some of the better choices of cereals or granolas that you can make and replace that on your shopping list. And it means you can add more fruit to it, you can add seeds, you can add, even if you fancy some honey, you can do so, but you do that knowing that you're not adding to a potentially toxic plate of sugar already. And last but not least, what I promised you, replacing your food cravings. So if you have a look at this table, you might see yourself in these, some of the ones that you tend to lean towards on a regular basis, and looking at ways in which you can maybe replace that desire by what your body actually needs, because quite often our brain is telling us something completely different, or our stomach is telling us that it needs sugar when it's actually needing an essential nutrient. And here's some ideas of what you can eat instead to give the illusion that you have satisfied your brain or your belly, but you've actually given your body exactly what it has been deficient in or what it is actually craving at a deeper level. Thanks for listening. Stick around until the next video where we're going to be discussing all of the navigating that you have to do around weight loss and some of the ways in which you can support that journey from a holistic point of view.